Do you know how is and where CSS pseudo-classes work, why you should be using them, what exactly is the difference between them, and how can they help you simplify your CSS? Stick to the end of this video and find out everything you need to know about these two amazing CSS pseudo-classes. The is CSS pseudo-class function takes a selector list as its argument, and it will match any element on the page that can be matched by any of those selectors in that list. For example, if I wanted to match a headline and paragraph elements on this page, I could write it with the is pseudo-class like this. This is essentially the same as this, so it will match any element on the page, and we will restrict that selection to h1 and paragraph elements. And for this example, let's set background color to dark blue. As you clearly see, our h1 element and our paragraphs were matched exactly as you would expect. At this point, this example seems silly and unnecessary, but stick with me just for a moment and you'll see exactly how can this simplify your CSS. In any case, the equivalent for this is selector would be if you write h1, comma p selector list, this would select exactly the same elements on the page as right here. But the difference is that you can very easily match the sentence from the arguments that you have in the is selector. This means that if you want to match or anchor links within h1 or paragraph text, you can simply extend the selector like this, and this would then match all anchor links within h1 element or within a paragraph. As we don't have any anchor links in the paragraph text, let's add li and select all anchor links from this list here. An equivalent in the selector list for this case would then be something like this: h1a, pa, and then lia. As you can see, this is much more readable and much more simpler selector than this one. Of course, if you wanted this to match all headline elements, not just h1, then you would have to copy this and add h2, h3, and so on and so on. And in our is selector, this would be much simpler and it would look exactly like this. So we're selecting all anchor links that are within any of those elements in this particular list. And the where selector works exactly like this with one major difference, and we will get to that in a bit. I want to show you that you can also nest is statements, so we can write this as is h1, h2, h3 paragraph or link element, and then we add another is selector and we target anchor links for span elements within those elements before. So we're targeting here all span elements or all a elements that are within li, p, h3, h2 or h1 elements. And as a selector list, this would be much more complicated, and we would basically have to copy all of this and then change all of those A tags to span. As you can see, this ridiculously long selector list can be simplified with is pseudo-class function. Whenever you catch yourself repeating certain parts of the selector, like here we're repeating anchor tags and span tags, then you should be thinking about using is pseudo-class. And one thing that you need to know about is pseudo-class is that specificity is equivalent to the most specific selector within that list. And this is exactly what is the difference between is and where pseudo-class. As I mentioned, where pseudo-class works exactly like this. We could switch this with where and it would work exactly the same with one major difference, and I'll show you exactly what the difference is in a moment. For now, I will comment this out and I will add another is pseudo-class here, and let's match our headline class. And or li elements. Of course, we will select all anchor links within our headline or within li element. Let's set color here to hot pink. The equivalent of this will be if we write .headline a and lia selectors, but the difference between this and this is that specificity here would always be class and then anchor. So this is not exactly the same as this. When this is selector matches li element and anchor links within it, this li selector will have the specificity of a class selector because the class is the most specific selector in this particular list. If we had here ID selector, then the specificity would be equal to ID selector. And this is a very important distinction that you should know about, because if you write later in your CSS selector like lia, you could expect that this would override selector that you have here is lia. If we set here color light blue, you will see that this will not override our lia selector, even though it looks like it should, because this seems exactly the same specificity as here, because we have li element, and within that element we're matching anchor links, but with is, specificity is equal to the highest specificity of one of the selectors in the list. In this case, this is the class, even though we're not specifically matching class in this particular instance when we're targeting anchor links within LI elements. The is selector will always set its own specificity to the highest specificity of the selector list. Even if one of the selectors here doesn't match any elements on the page, the specificity will still be applied based on that selector. So we could have here ID headline. As you can see, this is not matching any elements on the page because we don't have ID set on our headline element, but specificity here will still be set exactly to the specificity of the ID. There are a few more gotchas that you should know about when working with is and where selectors, but before we get there, I want to show you exactly what is the difference between where selector and is selector. Let's return our headline to class and let's switch is to where. Where, unlike is, sets its own specificity to the value of 0, or basically it has no specificity. So anything you put in the list here, be it ID, be it class, be it tag selector, it will add no weight to your entire selector. Essentially, the specificity of this now is as we're writing a single tag A right here. And that's why we have color light blue overwriting our LIA elements, as you clearly see right here. This also means that we could move this entire block above our where selector and it will still take precedence over our where clause because we have just a single tag here for our specificity while we have two tags right here, which means that specificity of this is higher than specificity of our where pseudo-class selector. So this is the crucial difference between is and where pseudo-classes. The is pseudo-class will set its own specificity to the highest specificity from its argument list, while the where pseudo-class will always default to 0. Specificity of where is 0 and makes no difference to your style sheets. Lastly, let's address a few gotchas when it comes to is and where pseudo-classes. By default, when you're writing selectors in CSS, if one of the arguments in that selector is invalid, for example, let's add here li at a, which is obviously an invalid selector, entire block of code will be invalidated. For example, let's select headline anchor links, which is obviously a valid part of this selector. This entire block is deemed invalid by CSS. If any part of your selector is invalid, the entire block will be ignored by CSS. That is not the case for is and where pseudo-classes. Where and is pseudo-classes are forgiving, which means that if one of the arguments in the selector list is invalid, let's add a here again, this will not invalidate the entire block of code. Another gotcha when working with is and where pseudo-classes is that pseudo-elements don't work within the selector list. So for example, if you wanted to add pseudo-elements to our h1 element, h1 before and h1 after, and let's set content here to a star emoji that is, it works exactly as it should. But if we wanted to simplify this using the is pseudo-class, for example, and write this as is before, comma, after pseudo-elements, this will not work because is and where pseudo-classes unfortunately don't work with pseudo-elements. Another thing that you should be aware about is pseudo-class is that originally it was named matches and any. So if you find any articles, any guides on matches or any pseudo-classes, you should know that this is now is pseudo-class. Whenever you're writing selector lists and you catch yourself repeating parts of those selectors, then consider using is or where pseudo-classes because they will allow you to simplify your CSS. And this is especially true if you're trying to match multiple nested elements exactly as we've shown in the demo right here. If you want to learn more about simplifying your CSS, this is the video that you should watch next. Thank you so much for your attention. My name is Zoran Jambor. I will see and hear you in a different CSS pseudo-class that won't affect your specificity at all, just like where pseudo-class.